I'm 30 years old now, and a few months ago, the bank called to confirm a loan application for $150,000, but I hadn't applied for a loan, and I didn't even know about it. I later learned that my sister Olivia's ideal wedding had been financed by my parents, taking out a sizable debt in my name. I was never very close to Olivia, who was lavished with attention from an early age. Even though my parents might share some of the blame, Olivia should have had ample time to think things through at the age of 25. Even during family gatherings, we rarely see each other. The moment that shocked me was learning that my parents, whom I had barely spoken to for a long time, had taken out a substantial loan without consulting me and had even signed me up as the co-signer. I believe Olivia has been with her fiancé, John, for about a year. They got engaged a few months ago, yet I wasn't even invited to the wedding, which was the purpose of the loan. I had expected not to be invited, so I wasn't particularly bothered by it, and my parents never mentioned it, so I didn't think it was an issue. After receiving the call from the bank, I quickly phoned my parents. At first, I thought it was some mistake, but my parents immediately admitted the truth, even going as far as defending Olivia, saying, as her sister, it's only natural to support her wedding, even if it means signing under your own name. Apparently, Olivia had discussed her need for money for the wedding with my parents, and they couldn't bring themselves to refuse her. Surprisingly, both Olivia and John are employed and should have sufficient income. Nevertheless, they claimed they couldn't cover the wedding expenses on their own funds and pleaded with my parents. Had it not been for Olivia's plan for an extravagant wedding, they could have managed without relying on our parents' assets. They even consulted John's parents, but they refused to pay and set firm limits. So why didn't my parents respond in the same way? To make matters worse, my parents anticipated that I would not agree to the loan, and they even forged my signature. They decided that confirming with me would be too much of a hassle, choosing instead not to contact me at all. When I learned this fact, I couldn't contain my anger toward my parents, but the loan had already been approved, and it was too late for me to do anything. Determined to somehow resolve this situation, I decided to take my parents to court. My father kept repeating, "It's only natural for you to help your sister as a family." Furthermore, he tried to dissuade me by saying, "If you file a lawsuit, you'll only hurt the family," using my sister's involvement as a reason. After hanging up the phone in anger, I realized my father was only worried about the wedding and the impact on my sister, showing no concern over the fact that my parents had committed fraud. Afterward, I solidified my decision to take legal action, informed my parents of my intentions, and resolved to sever ties with my family. I then called the bank and requested a copy of the documents signed when the loan was contracted. I began preparing to cut ties with my family after carefully planning the legal steps to avoid a major fallout. I contacted a lawyer to understand the situation fully. I needed to know every detail. While reviewing the loan contract, I felt a sense of despair. What particularly caught my attention was the condition that the loan had to be repaid within 2 years. This was a heavy burden for me. My parents knew that I was planning to start my own business in the near future. Despite having spent months securing funding and seeking investors, my parents had shown no regard for my plans. They should have known I intended to quit my job soon, meaning I wouldn't have a stable income for a while. Yet now, I'm in a situation where a single late payment would trigger the obligation to repay the $150,000 loan. It seemed my parents hadn't really considered just how heavy a burden this would be, thinking my future and personal plans were irrelevant. I logged into Facebook and searched for my sister's fiancé, John. At that moment, I felt something shift within me. If they had dragged me into this situation, I felt I needed to let everyone know the truth. I detailed how my parents had taken out a loan in my name, forged my signature, and drafted all the paperwork without my consent. I advised John to break off the engagement immediately and reconsider marrying into a family capable of such actions. Additionally, I sent the same message to my sister's friends, relatives, and my parents. I felt they all deserved to know the truth. Yet deep down, I wondered if I had gone a bit too far. I also wanted to confirm if my sister herself knew about the situation. She was always close to our parents, so it was hard to imagine they would do something like this without her knowledge. The response was immediate. My parents were furious. They desperately begged me to retract my statements and repeatedly reached out to my sister. It turned out my sister was unaware of the loan or the fact that I was made the co-signer. Upon learning the truth, she was not only upset about being lied to, but also angry that she would now have to cover the wedding expenses herself. She was livid with our parents. As usual, my mother became emotional, loudly blaming me for destroying everything and insisting I had no right to interfere. My parents condemned me for telling John and his family the truth, but I paid them no mind. Looking back now, I wonder if there was ever truly a need to support my sister to such an extent. My parents intended to deceive me to give her the money, but then I heard from my sister, who had learned the whole story. She said, "I wasn't told about the loan, but you should have discussed it with our family before telling John and his family." My sister accused me of ruining her marriage and wedding plans. She's not entirely wrong. I admit I should have discussed the issue with the family first, but did she truly know nothing about it? I began to feel uneasy, wondering if I had gone too far by exposing the truth. Had I really done the right thing? Since I had dragged John's family into the situation and created chaos, I decided to take responsibility and resolve it once everything was settled. However, I remained firm in my decision to pursue legal action. The bank responded, stating that they would investigate the fraudulent loan application, and since the loan was not fully processed, I was told I wouldn't be responsible for any payments. Fortunately, a few days later, I managed to find the contact information to speak directly with John and his family. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from my parents, relatives, friends, and messages from my sister. Everyone was blaming me, saying, "You shouldn't have made a family issue public. You went too far." My sister angrily called, saying John and his family were reconsidering the wedding itself because of what I had said, leaving me extremely confused. She accused me, saying I had trampled on her life. She was deeply distressed as she hadn't known anything about the loan or the co-signing that my parents had arranged. Hearing my sister blame me left me shocked. She advised me that if I had an issue, I should have contacted our parents directly rather than severing ties. When I emailed John and his parents, I was certainly overcome by anger, but I didn't think my actions were wrong at the time. I asked my sister, "You knew everything, didn't you?" But she kept insisting, "It's none of my business." So I once again told her how our parents had always prioritized her over me, always saying yes to her, and now committing fraud under my name to fulfill her wishes. She wasn't willing to accept that easily. And since she didn't seem to be lying, I began to wonder if I had been wrong to assume she was involved in the first place. I wasn't sure whether to trust my sister, but I wasn't ready to give up so easily. The next morning, I received a call from my mother. She was extremely upset, crying on the phone, and desperately pleading with me to reconsider. My mother told me that John had broken off his engagement with my sister, but when I spoke with her last night, she didn't mention it at all. She only said the situation was difficult, without a word about him ending the engagement. I was shocked but couldn't express it, and my mother told me how distraught my sister was and how much she blamed me. It seemed that my suggestion for him to reconsider the engagement had made him feel the situation was grave. My mother went on for quite some time about how I had ruined my sister's life, torn our family apart, and caused everyone pain. I listened quietly, feeling both a sense of guilt and a strange conviction that I hadn't acted wrongly. In some corner of my heart, I couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing my parents suffer. I felt genuinely sorry that my sister's wedding had fallen apart. When my mother finished speaking, I firmly stated, "I'm not going to apologize for telling them the truth." I reminded her not to forget that they had committed fraud. I am not the villain here. I criticized my parents for signing those documents without my consent. My mother still seemed unable to grasp the situation. The rest of the week passed in a daze, but my mother kept repeating that I should have turned a blind eye to keep the family together and maintain peace. I was able to avoid contact with my family, but rumors quickly spread that something was wrong, and relatives began offering their opinions on my response. Some people encouraged me, saying, "You have every right to be angry," while others advised, "You shouldn't make family matters public like this." During this time, my sister started posting aggressively on social media, venting her feelings without directing it at anyone in particular, myself, her friends, or anyone else. I felt uncomfortable with people who, without fully understanding the situation, expressed sympathy and support. They wrote whatever they pleased about how people only wanted to see things get worse, or that the worst betrayal came from people like that, but I had no intention of engaging. I wasn't interested in a social media battle with my own sister. A few days later, my sister contacted me again. She was still angry, but a bit calmer than before. She told me, "The engagement has officially been called off. I'm breaking up with John, and his family has completely cut off contact with me." She also mentioned that she'd be moving out of the shared house and planned to stay with a friend for a while. However, what she said next truly shocked me. She admitted to me that she had known about the loan. I was stunned. After all her declarations of being uninvolved and knowing nothing about our parents' actions, she finally admitted that she had been aware of it from the beginning. She insisted I might have gone about it the wrong way, but I thought everything would be fine once the wedding was over. She added, "I didn't think it would become such a big deal." Furthermore, she mentioned that she hadn't expected the bank to contact me directly. When I asked, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she replied, "I was too scared to say anything. It seemed they had planned to keep everything a secret from me. My sister was worried that if I found out, it would jeopardize the wedding. But that worry became a reality when she said, 'I thought he'd marry me.' Once things settled down, I couldn't hide my surprise. However, after he broke things off, she no longer felt the need to keep it a secret. I was filled with guilt over my sister's situation for the past week. I had been racked with guilt until I learned that she knew about the loan. My sister seemed angry only because her plan had failed, not because her relationship with John had ended. In her anger, she called me a terrible person and immature, to which I responded, "I owe you nothing, and I don't need to return any favors." At that moment, I realized just how damaged our family relationships were, and I was certain there was no going back. After talking with her, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. My family had never truly cared about me. I no longer needed to worry about people who were indifferent toward me. However, that conversation did nothing to lessen the fallout. Though I hadn't been in touch with my parents for some time, they persistently reached out to me over the following weeks. My relationship with my parents only worsened, and numerous relatives called me, trying to convince me to drop the lawsuit. They said, "Aren't they your parents? And isn't there another way?" They seemed willing to overlook the fact that my parents had committed fraud, and they thought legal action was unjust. So I ignored their attempts to persuade me. I kept in regular contact with my lawyer, dedicating myself to gathering as much evidence as possible. The more I learned about my parents' actions, the angrier I became. Not only had they forged my signature, but they had also altered financial records and falsified income to secure the loan. Fortunately, the bank respected my perspective and decided I held no responsibility for the loan. Furthermore, my parents found themselves in serious legal trouble, and the family conflict intensified even more. My sister started living with friends, moving out of her apartment completely to start a new life. She blamed me for her breakup with John and was also angry at our parents for creating this situation. One day, I received an email from my Aunt Emily. She had remained consistently silent on the matter, one of the few who held a neutral stance. I hadn't planned on involving her, but she suggested we talk over coffee. Since Emily wasn't the type to stir up conflict or take sides, I decided to accept her invitation. When we met, she asked about my current situation. Talking with someone who wasn't trying to control me felt comforting, and I was relieved by her concern. After we chatted about recent events for a while, she casually brought up my parents. "Your parents seem very shaken right now," she said, stirring her coffee gently. "They're quite worried about what might happen if this goes to court, but they should have considered that before committing fraud." "I suppose they didn't expect you to take things this far," Emily said with a nod. I knew I wanted to avoid being trampled by them again. "I understand how you feel, but what do you really want?" she asked. "Do you want a sincere apology, or do you want your parents to pay for what they've done?" Her question took me by surprise. "I just want to understand," I replied slowly. "What's your ultimate goal?" she asked. I realized that I hadn't considered things from that perspective before. Part of me wanted to be completely free of this situation, while another part felt my parents should face the consequences of their actions. "Maybe I just want them to understand that they can't take me lightly ever again," I replied. Emily nodded slightly. "I completely understand that feeling, but that's not how it looks to your parents. To them, they see you as the source of all the issues." Her words were painful, but I appreciated her honesty. I had sensed that this was how my parents thought too. As she said, they would never admit their mistakes. She hugged me and encouraged me, saying, "Stay strong. Though your parents have always seen you as the family troublemaker, I feel they're the ones who fractured our family relationships. This isn't a big deal. You're not in the wrong as a person. Even if your parents won't admit their faults, your actions are more sincere than anything they've done to you." After our conversation, I found myself reflecting on what I truly wanted. Even though I knew it might place more strain on the family, I began to consider whether to take this to court or if there might be another way to resolve things. A few days later, my lawyer called to inform me that my parents' attorney had proposed an out-of-court settlement. I felt some anxiety considering the legal implications. My parents indicated that they were willing to pay a substantial amount of compensation if I agreed to drop the lawsuit. I felt a desire to move forward, but while I was tempted by their offer, I wasn't sure if I should forgive them so easily. The proposed settlement amount was more than sufficient, as it allowed me to avoid a full-blown legal battle while securing a form of financial justice for their actions. So with my lawyer, I carefully reviewed the details. The settlement was enough to relieve my financial worries, giving me the freedom to focus on my business without the economic stress that had burdened me for so long. Yet in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the doubt that this might make them believe I had forgiven them. Still, this settlement felt like a kind of victory. In the end, I decided to accept the offer, agreeing to drop the lawsuit. My parents agreed to pay the compensation. With this, my issues were resolved, but my parents would still face charges from the bank for fraud. It wasn't an ideal outcome, but once the paperwork was completed and everything was officially over, I felt a sense of accomplishment. Having signed everything and closed the lawsuit, I no longer needed to worry about it. However, this decision had definitively altered my relationship with my sister and parents. The family tradition of spending holidays together was gone, and after this resolution, we would no longer gather as a family. While I thought I'd feel relieved, we had now become little more than strangers bound only by blood and shared memories. My decision ended the legal issues, and the settlement allowed me to start my new business on a positive note. But it was difficult to let go completely. Even weeks after the settlement, the events lingered in my mind, and I had to accept that my relationship with my family would never be the same. They were still alive, yet I felt as though I had lost my sister and parents forever. However, I had no desire to reach out, and I knew they would never contact me either. One evening, while I was working on paperwork in my new office, I received an email from my Aunt Emily, simply asking, "How have you been?" Since we hadn't been in touch since meeting a few weeks ago, I was surprised to see her message. In her email, she wrote, "I know it's been difficult, but don't carry everything on your own." Her words had a bigger impact on me than I had expected. Perhaps she had sensed that something was off. I realized just how isolated I had become, losing friends and distancing myself from my family. It meant a lot that she reached out to me. Even though I had no idea what I truly needed, I knew I wanted to regain a connection with my family. I resolved to stop carrying the burden alone. A few days later, we met again at the same cafe. When I felt more settled, she looked at me with gentle eyes. "Family isn't always just about blood ties," she said. I was thinking about the settlement, feeling conflicted about accepting the money. I hadn't entirely let go of my resentment toward my parents. "Family is something you choose," she added. "It's okay to find others who'll be there for you. You don't need to cling to the past, even if your sister or parents aren't close by." Her words resonated deeply. Cutting ties with family, no matter how much pain they'd caused, was like erasing years of seeking my parents' approval, something that had defined much of my life. I thought it was impossible, but as Emily said, I didn't need to stay trapped in the past. Thanks to her, I was able to move forward and start a life where I no longer depended on the people who had hurt me. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't impossible either. Several weeks passed, and I established my own company using the settlement money. I hired employees and began taking on challenges that were both beneficial and achievable on my own. As a result, my days have been incredibly fulfilling. One day, as I was heading home from work, I received a call from an unknown number. Work had become my new source of passion, and for the first time in a while, I felt hopeful about the future. But the past appeared before me in an unexpected way. Something seemed intent on keeping me from leaving it behind. Yet, I tried to ignore it. The caller was my sister, and she said, "I want to talk with you one more time." I hadn't been in contact with her since her engagement was broken off, so hearing her voice left me feeling unsettled. Unlike before, she spoke in a very calm tone. "I just found out that our parents are selling the house," she continued. "I thought you should know what's happened too." Her voice sounded a bit somber. "You probably don't want to hear this from me, but our parents are in debt and have run out of money." Her words left me speechless, and I didn't know how to respond. "They lost everything because of what happened with you," she said, but then quickly added, "But I realized that this is the result of their own actions." I felt a little bit of guilt. She whispered, "Our parents brought this upon themselves with their fraud. I don't feel responsible for their financial ruin, but I don't know what to do either." I couldn't fully understand what my sister expected from me. She had been living with a friend, but that situation seemed to have soured as well. Was she seeking my sympathy, or perhaps my support? Finally, I managed to reply in a calm tone, "I know this is a very tough situation. I don't know if there's anything I can do, but our parents' choices led to this outcome. They misled other people." "What did our parents want?" she immediately asked in response. I wasn't trying to start an argument. I didn't think our parents were entirely without responsibility, but I was surprised by her sensitivity to others' emotions and situations. I knew where I needed to go. I had rarely seen my sister so unsettled, the sister who had always been spoiled and raised with a strong sense of entitlement. Suddenly, she sounded anxious and confused. "You need to realize it yourself. Try to approach it as kindly as you can," I said. For years, I had tried talking with our parents, only to reach the conclusion that I had to walk my own path. "Maybe it's time for you to walk your own path too." After a long silence on the other end of the line, she replied, "Yes, maybe it is." After that, we barely spoke before ending the call. I wasn't entirely sure how I felt in that moment. A few weeks later, I found out that our parents had sold the house and were planning to move to a smaller one. However, I didn't feel I could solve their financial struggles or my sister's issues either. I didn't contact my parents. I felt that it was time to let go of my desire for their acceptance, which I had always cherished. I was able to make something just for me for the first time. I felt liberated from my parents' demands and authority for the first time in my life. Although it hadn't been an easy path, I was happy to be able to start my business with the settlement money. I am now a respected individual rather than someone who is ignored. I'm going to keep going and make the most of my life.